just like learning, once you stop, you kind of die.
Yeah.
You have to keep growing.
Right.
And you have to keep growing your knowledge and your networks to be successful.
Right. Continue to add value too. As we open it up for questions, I think Jimmy's got the microphone. One question to kind of get this going is, you're a VC. I think you touched on this before. A lot of startups are scared to pitch you or send out anything. What's the best way, or that you've seen people reach out to you and kind of pitch their business? Is it just send a deck, or via email, or like what works for you?
Yeah, we look at every email. We might not respond immediately. We try to get back at some point. I think Twitter's highly effective for reaching out to anybody in the tech industry because it's a public medium as well.
Yeah.
So when an entrepreneur tweets at a VC, actually the whole world, all the VC's followers can see it. And if the VC is not responding, it's pressure on him or her to respond. And oftentimes within seconds or minutes, it's okay, DM me your email address, and then boom, a conversation's created. So love Twitter as that kind of public medium for that.
Gotta follow him on Twitter. He's tweeting every 5 seconds.
Tweeting right now, actually. I'm tweeting.
It's unbelievable.
LinkedIn is interesting because we get so much mail on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And it's hard to sift through. I try to look at almost everything. Mm-hmm. I feel like the signal to noise ratio on LinkedIn, it's definitely more noisy. And so I think that's a pretty common perception. So I don't know if that's the best channel to get to somebody. I would say emails are great. Twitter's great. If you can get an intro from, actually here's another inside baseball tip. I used to call this as an entrepreneur Inception, like the movie. If you're trying to get to somebody, you can actually see who's connected to that person pretty easily. You can use LinkedIn for that. And you can see you have 45 people connected to this person. You can look at them, see how they're connected to that person. If you want to really make an impact on that person about you, you ask those 45 people, say 10 of those people, to introduce you to that person or to mention to that person your name. All of a sudden that person is getting hit up from 10 people that are closer to that person than you about you, and they're like, oh, I gotta reach out to this, what's up?
Yeah.
What's going on here? This is not just coincidence, it is, but or it's not, but anyway, I call that tactic Inception because it always works.
I like
and by the way, if you even just expend that amount of energy getting to know somebody, they're going to have respect for the hustle and take that meeting. So I've used that a bunch of times as a CEO, trying to get to a customer. It's always works.
It's a gem.
But these days, Twitter is also very powerful because it's a public medium where you can express a desire for connection. Mm-hmm. And if the person doesn't respond, it looks bad, upon them.
Yeah. We get questions? Anybody want to jump in here? Don't be shy. Yep.
So as you would transition from CEO to investor, what's some of the lessons learned? How can you stay away from running the founder startup?
A lot of lessons learned. I think the things that we've distilled now, kind of what we look at our at an ideal founding team, like a team that's self-sufficient, that can build, ship, and sell the product by themselves. A team that has ideally failed before or had a small taste of success before. Those are things that we look for. There's so many mistakes that we've made and that we've seen made that we try to avoid now. At our stage, we try to make sure the founder is not outsourcing sales to somebody, not them, because that feedback loop of data from the customer is so important at that early stage. So when a startup CEO is hiring an SVP of sales, like a pre-Series A company, it's usually a red flag. When a founder is building a technical product and they don't have a CTO co-founder, that's usually a red flag. So there's so many of these lessons that we picked up over time. But those are some of the ones that I think are top of mind.
That's good.
Thank you very much, Nihal, for all your time tonight. There's been a lot of discussion about changes in the VC industry. Whether it's alternate funding sources, or maybe startups that want to be big. They see a great opportunity, but they don't want to go through everything. Would you, here's my question, would you not invest in a company if they said, you know what, I'm going to do the seed round, and then we're going to be profitable, and we're going to grow and fund ourselves and not do a Series A? Because you had said earlier, 12 to 18 months in Series A. What if someone didn't want to do that process?
Yeah, I think capital and funding rounds are completely variable based on the needs of the business, and so honestly, as a VC, I mean, I'm negotiating against myself, but like most businesses do not need venture capital. Actually, one of our favorite co-investors, Founder Collective, wrote a blog post about this recently. That if you're an entrepreneur, VC is probably not right for you. But if you want to add fuel, high octane fuel, to a fire that's already burning, then it may be right for you. But we see so many entrepreneurs raising VC at high valuations and then not being able to live up to those valuations at all, and having down rounds or flat rounds, and it's not good for anybody. It puts artificial pressure on a business that doesn't deserve it. So we've been lucky to have some very capital efficient businesses. There's a business in New York called Vistar, for example, that only raised like $1 million in seed capital, and they're doing like $90 million in revenue this year. Off of that one, those are incredible businesses, right? Then you think about other businesses like Uber, that's taken a lot of money, and they're having real struggles because they never figured out that unit economic equation early on. They never figured out the real business. They didn't have the scarcity of capital to force themselves into a good business model early, because everybody, SoftBank, et cetera, wanted to plow in all these big rounds. And so anyway, I think it's really dependent on the business. But if you can be extremely constrained on capital, I think it's better for you than worse.
So, Patricia.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you also for being here. I was curious also when you were talking about your company and red flags. If you're a sole member, co-founder, does your company ever have interest in being that co-founder and now having equity? You said your company doesn't do equity as a partnership, but does your company ever consider that?
You mean like an incubation or? Yeah.
All the way.
Yeah. So there are a lot of investors that incubate businesses or become real co-founders with entrepreneurs, and they're not just on the board, but they're also spending a chunk of their time as a co-founder. We do about 10 investments a year, and so it's not scalable for us to actually become co-founders of businesses. Now, there are some funds. There's a fund in New York, Thrive Capital, and Josh Kushner is one of the founders of that fund. He actually builds businesses out of Thrive as a co-founder, and one of which is called Oscar Health, which is disrupting healthcare, which is becoming very large. And so there are some VCs in which this is a model for them. Okay. We've decided at Eniac that we'd rather invest, take an equity position, stay on the board, work very closely with founders, but don't officially become a co-founder.
thank you.
You just gonna grab the mic.
Real estate, and I've seen, for example, Boston Dynamics. They're very capital heavy. How do you look towards companies that knowingly have a long R&D development, long R&D time in front of them? How do you, as a VC, look to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we actually, this is funny because yesterday Charlie thought that, I think probably from my tweet, that
Yes.
there's another Nihal Mehta out there who's a real PhD who published a book on quantum computing yesterday.
Well, you said you were super proud of it.
And so I tweeted out saying, I'm super proud of my latest publication. And some people, this guy, took it seriously. I, by the way, sent it to like my family WhatsApp, and I said, please buy as many books as you can. I have like random aunts in India that are so proud that I'm like a quantum physicist now. I'm not going to tell them I'm not. But going back to your question, we actually invested in a quantum computing company a couple of years ago. And by the way, that's probably doesn't come to light from a commercial standpoint for like 10 years, if that. But we know that it's a bet that we want to take because it could be completely industry game changing. And so I think if you have that expectation that you're not going to be generating revenue next year or maybe for the next 10 years, but there's certain milestones that you will hit and you kind of break it down into maybe more qualitative things, if it's not revenue, then I think a lot of more patient investors would be excited about it, you know? And that happens more on the frontier. You mentioned Boston Dynamics, so it happens in robotics, it happens in quantum, it happens in life sciences, it happens in drug discovery, where a ton of capital has to come in, and they might not have FDA approval for 2 decades. But I think aligning yourself with the right investor who knows that there's other milestones along the way is really important. So we're not afraid of those at all. I'd say about a quarter of our investments are frontier. Things like robotics. We have an autonomous forklift company, an autonomous naval cargo ship company, an autonomous autopilot 2.0 for commercial airline company, quantum computing company. We're not afraid to do that stuff, and we know that it's not generating revenue for years.
So I'll take a couple more questions.
Hi, thank you for being here. You spoke a lot about like kind of having a full stack, co-founding team and failure and things like that. But when people are walking in for the first time and pitching you, are there certain things that questions you're asking yourself, or certain things that you want to see in that pitch deck in terms of product plan or certain metrics or milestones that you're looking for?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I think that the most important thing is telling a good story and the team. And so that's you, that's the founder. And that narrative is incredibly important to get across. Like, why are you uniquely positioned, maybe the only person in the world, to build this business? Like, all the dots somehow have connected in your life prior. Where you grew up, where you went to school, your experiences that you've had, the last job, the pain points you've experienced to build this business now. And if a founder can relay that story to us in that first meeting, then that's a successful meeting. We very, very rarely do we like, and we tell founders up front, like, do not walk me through a deck during our first meeting. We actually like founders that are like, you know what, I'll send you the deck after the meeting. Like, here's the headline, here's a blurb, here's the website. If you're interested, let's talk. I'm just going to talk to you. Let's be interactive. I want to tell you my story. I want to tell you why I'm a special human to pull off this business. And then if you're interested, I'll send you the deck after. Those are our favorite meetings.
Interesting. Yes.
And by the way, then your deck doesn't like get spread all over the internet, you know, to random people that are not relevant. It only goes into the hands of folks that are genuinely interested.
I really liked what you said earlier about scar tissue. So I just come out of working in a VC, and I really would like to understand from your perspective where you say, okay, that's actually like good scar tissue. You see, okay, these people are actually making progress, but also there are some, right, that kind of fall for the same traps again and again. So maybe you have like some like easy hacks of how to break
Yeah.
down like good and bad scar tissue.
Yeah, that's a very good question. You know, I'm going to translate that to another question, which is, when do you know when it's time to give up what you're doing or pivot the business, right? The definition of insanity is what, keep on doing the same thing over and over with the same results, right? Or without changing anything. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs get into that rut. And so when is the time to pivot, to change your business? I think that's a very important question. Usually the time to change is when you're out of money and you have no choice, right? Like, I had the luxury of Philly Tonight going bankrupt to know I had to change the business, you know, to ipsh. I used a lot of the same things a lot of the same software, but changed from B2C to B2B. Actually, the same thing from Buzz to LocalResponse, which we didn't talk about, but that was a B2C company that pivoted to B2B, also because we ran out of money. So usually money is a forcing function to know that whatever you're doing is not attracting capital or energy, so you have to change what you're doing. But I think it's important to keep in the back of every entrepreneur's mind that, you know, you might have to change it up. And actually, you definitely will change it up at some point. I mean, there's very few businesses that go public on the same business plan that they had at the seed stage. And there's probably no business that's done that, right? If you look at the Airbnb deck, which is public now versus where they are today, very different business. It was about, you know, putting airbeds in more of a networking community, you know, putting airbeds on folks' floors to like foster community. And now, you know, you can rent a yacht in Mauritius on Airbnb or whatever it is. So anyway, my point is, every business changes, twists and turns. I think every entrepreneur has to be thinking about that in the back of their mind. The forcing function is, where do you think I'm going to get the most energy by changing direction? You know, and maybe a time box is important too. Maybe setting these timelines for yourself. You know, I have until June 1st to get this business to work. Otherwise, I'm going to brainstorm for another quarter of a new model. I think those artificial timelines can help create more innovation.
So I'll take one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
This is interesting, Mike. Usually when, oh, thank you for coming, by the way. Usually when I hear like VCs talk, a lot of people ask questions like, oh, what should I do? How do I get funding? How do I do this? Can you give us like 5 things that you definitely should not do, like just across the board?
Yeah.
And I know there are different stages, of course, like seed stage and growth stage and all that. Like, you've been through all of those. So, like, I guess for each of them, what's like, just don't do that?
Yeah. There's a lot. I'm trying to think about 5. There's like millions. I mean, I think, you know, just pitching a deck without a product or a prototype is challenging. I think there should be some you know, semblance of a product that you can show, especially at seed stage. If you're a serial entrepreneur and you've done it before, then you might be able to raise money on a deck. But I think for the most part, you know, showing something that is working. And by the way, it's a lot cheaper and more efficient to launch something today. You can build wireframes online at the very least case. You know, you can jump on InVision or any of these tools. Adobe has a bunch of stuff as well that you can just build something quick. If it's a consumer app, it's very, very easy to create wireframes, and that's much better to show than just a deck. You know, be targeted on who you're approaching and why. You know, I think if you blanket, you're raising money, you're blanketing 10,000 people that say they're VCs on LinkedIn, like, probably not a good use of anybody's time. Be very particular about relationships and people that you want to connect with, and know that you want to connect for a specific reason, right? Maybe they've done something in their background, in their past, that's relevant for you to learn. So I know those are more of like should do's instead of should not do's, but I think that's easier for me to express because there's so many should not do's, you know. Not everybody has to code. Not everybody has to be an engineer. You know, I think that's maybe a common myth. I think there are now a lot of tools, like I mentioned, where a non-coder can just design something that can express your business a lot better than a deck can. And by the way, you get a lot more kudos if you try to build a prototype and you're not technical, you know, or you try to sell something into a customer and you're not a salesperson. Some of our best meetings are entrepreneurs that come in. I had a meeting yesterday. It's a serial founder, but he's building something in the healthcare space. He's building software for hospitals to use. And he walks in, and the first thing he says is, Nihal, you know there's 5,000 hospitals in the US. I talked to 87 of the top hospital CIOs in the past 6 months. Here's what I learned. He doesn't have a product, he has an idea of what he's going to build, but he just presented his learnings. And that was hugely impactful, right? Because he took the time to go out there and do all of this really hard work. And by the way, anybody can have 87 meetings, 87 coffees. You'll be hopped up on caffeine for whatever, a long time, but that's not hard to do, you know? So basically do your work, do your research. And he said out of these 87 meetings,